Suicide is a symptom of hopelessness. Aaron Burgin from Suicide Sucks joins us to talk about his brand, Suicide Sucks, which is geared toward rocker teens, and the need for messaging designed for the audience. He is taking the communication side of suicide support head on using prescriptive analytics, demographic appropriate branding, and sharing the importance of intentional connection. His nonprofit is doing a lot of good. Please reach out and lend your support. Enjoy. Welcome to the Illuminate Recovery podcast. We shed light on mental health issues, mental illness, and addiction recovery, ways to cope, manage, and inspire. Beyond the self-care we will discuss, you may need the help of a licensed professional. My name's Kurt Nider. I'm a husband, a father, entrepreneur, a handyman, and a student of life. I avoid conflict, I deflect with humor, and I'm fascinated by the human experience.
And I'm Shelley Mangum. I am a clinical mental health counselor, and my favorite role of all times is grandma. I am a seeker of truth, and I feel like life should be approached with tremendous curiosity.
I ask the dumb questions.
I fill in the gaps.
So I'm excited to kind of hear what this journey's been like for you, Aaron, and why you picked suicide prevention or suicide awareness. Maybe that would be an important question to ask: is how did you get into this?
Well, so I was serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ in Washington. I started getting emails from my little brother, who's 15 months younger than me. He had joined the military and had left, and I didn't really see him much, but by the time I left out on my mission, and I started getting these emails from him, which I was so excited about. Each week I'd come, just so excited to get to my computer to hear from my brother. And he started saying some things that, back in the day, there was things that happened to us. You walked away, but I got stuck. And, I started thinking, I hope he's okay. And that's the extent of my thoughts. So I hope he's okay. And it wasn't long after, and I found out that he had taken his life. And I felt so surprised and so shocked at this whole experience, and not being home for the whole experience was just really, really difficult. And it took a few years of just trying to really empathize with him. I had to get into his mindset and just think through all the memories I had with him growing up, like where the paths could have deviated. Because suicide's never crossed my mind. It's never been a challenge. But our parents did go through a divorce, and our family didn't always have the greatest, experiences, and we didn't do a very good job of taking care of each other. And then all that weight just felt like it was just always on my shoulders. And so for me to go figure out where he was important. So I started Googling, how do I kill myself? And Google's responses were, well, you could shoot yourself, you could cut yourself, you could jump off a bridge. There's all these articles teaching me how to die, teaching me how to do it faster or slower, more painful or less painful. And it was just disgusting, honestly. And at the time, I was just angry about that, right? It's 2015, targeting products were already following you around the internet everywhere you go. And the marketing technology that wasn't being applied was just disgusting to me. And so I looked around and I tried to find a nonprofit that was applying marketing technologies to find people that are asking for help as they type in their suicide message. And there was no one doing it. So I decided to start the nonprofit, and I eventually left my career, like I mentioned, left my production career, management career, and to go start the nonprofit. Went full-time for 6 months, attended the state prevention meetings, the county prevention meetings, just got as deep as I could into what prevention was. And what I saw was what you mentioned. People in the profession are vested, they're invested, and they're interested in preventing it. But the thing that's happening is that people are being surprised by their loved one killing themselves, and they're not being aware of what's going on. So there was a disconnect. So ultimately I started, postulating what does technology look like in 10 or 15 years. and what will that do for our prevention efforts? And ultimately it came down to, well, machine learning and data will actually tell us so much. There was a couple of professors out of Florida and Vanderbilt that actually created an algorithm based off of clinical questions, standard questions a doctor would ask to 5,000 patients. And they predicted based off of those questions a 93% accuracy who is going to attempt to kill themselves in the next 7 days. Right? And that's a pretty short window of time, but that's a ton more time than most people get, right? And then they actually had an additional study that said within 2 years, we can predict that within 84 or 83% accuracy. And so I thought, if we can get that accurate from just clinical data, what if we had all of everyone's online data? What if all the data that they're being tracked anyways for marketing, what if that was actually applied to prevention in a way that we could actually find people before they died, right? So long story short, I thought, you know what, that's out of my league to go build an algorithm. Guaranteed Google and Facebook will come out with something here soon. Took 6 months. Facebook hired 3,000 suicide prevention and detection employees. 3,000 is so many. But at the time, there was 10 suicides broadcasted live, right? I don't know if you remember those stories, but live features had just come out, and there was at least 10 across YouTube, MySpace, Facebook that had killed themselves on camera for millions of people to watch. And so, for me, it was like, they're going to build the technology, but once they do, what then? The next level of analytics is, first you can have descriptive analytics, describe what's happened in the past. Then you can have a predictive analytics based on what's happened in the past. We predict this is going to happen. And then after that, you can actually have a prescriptive, right? So if somebody is going to actually attempt to hurt themselves, can I prescribe them a message that actually helps them feel differently, think differently? And it was first publicly used in Obama's presidential campaign. And that's actually what they credited his victory to, was using prescriptive analytics. Find the right message for the right people, and you convince those people that, that life is worth living in our case. So I went and got a master's degree in communications so that I could figure out what are the different communication strategies? What are the ways we could reach out to people and use marketing technologies to then go find someone that's struggling and then use the right message. And that's where we are today, really. We got to figure that out. And all the organizations, whether you're in therapy or you're in addiction recovery, every one of us should have some sort of inbound process. And that should include using messages to reach people that are struggling, to bring them in, to give them that community and that support.
Whoa, that's pretty powerful stuff that you're talking about. I mean, my head's going a million miles an hour thinking, they're talking about doing artificial intelligence as therapists to kind of hold a space for a therapist, because right now they're all overworked. And so it would be really interesting to be able to target somebody that evidence shows they are thinking about suicide, and even open up a artificial intelligence for them to talk to. It kind of distances them, because so often they want to isolate and they want to be away, but they're willing to type to a computer, they're willing to engage in other ways. So that's pretty powerful. And when you talk about this algorithm that was, did you say 93% successful in predicting somebody's desire to attempt to take their own life?
Yeah. So 93% accurate in predicting the self-harm attempt.
That's incredible. I mean, most research is after 40 or 50% accuracy. 93% accuracy is huge. That's ginormous. So when we can, definitely we have to do something with that kind of information. Yeah,
and that was 5 or 6 years ago. And what they've done since then has just really been incredible. May of 2020, there was an article posted that there was a group that just wanted to scrape Twitter feeds, and they actually took 35,000 tweets, and they were able to successfully teach an algorithm what suicide looks like on Twitter, right? And imagine if you had the power of Google all the searches, all of the clicks, all of the views, all the behaviors. And then you have the power of Facebook and the comments, the likes, the music they're listening to. Imagine compiling that data to give us an idea, right? We don't know necessarily what are the inputs that lead to suicide, but if you had all the data, then you can start to figure that out. And the machines, the algorithms get smarter and smarter, and giving us more time. And what it always comes back down to, though, is what are your connections? Who are your support? Do you have family that's there to help you? And is someone there that can guide you through this process? Because ultimately, if you're in the state of mind where suicide is the only and best option for you, there isn't a lot that's going to convince you otherwise, right? So hopefully we can get messages in front of them that are inspiring, that are relevant. I've always thought, I would never want to give a firefighter that's 30 years in the business, seeing the gory and just the trauma that they go through. I would never want to show them a video of a teenage girl who has overcome being abused or raped, right? That's not relevant. And it would be kind of an icky feeling, right? To mismatch that message to that audience. So it's pretty critical that you get the message to the person correct.
Well, and what you said is true. I talk about AI and connecting, and my first thought is just how do we start to get them to talk? But what you said is really important and probably one of the most vital pieces of information, because they need connection. They need to know somebody cares and that their life matters. Because the truth is, if we want to talk about the way the brain works, right, is their prefrontal cortex, that part of the reasoning, rational, executive part of their brain is offline. They are not in a good state, like you said, to be able to think and to make good decisions. Their only way out of pain is to end their life. And so thinking of ways that we can engage with them to help to shift that, to help regulate some of that distress that they're feeling is going to be really important part of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the stats today are pretty astounding. In adolescence, is where a lot of my focus and research has been. They're saying 12 to 15 hours a day are being spent online. And if we are not creating strategies amidst that, those, with the 12 to 15 hours, whether it's Snapchat or Facebook, or I don't know if kids use Facebook anymore, TikTok probably, if we're not creating those types of content strategies, we're not going to get their attention, right? And so if you're a brand today that is interested in serving this audience, you've got to find those people that stand out as hopeful or that have overcome their unique challenges and share their stories on these platforms, so that those kids that are stuck scrolling have that bright spot every now and then as they're scrolling through their screen. And I think that's one of our most critical and best opportunities today, is insert positive, hopeful content amidst all of this strictly entertaining or strictly, negative material.
Well, that's a little incredible to me, that to think of a teenager sitting in front of a computer for 10 or 12 hours a day, which I know they're doing it, but it blows my mind. Right. Well, yeah, it's right. It's on their phone. And I look at my phone and go, I cannot read you. I need a computer screen. The generations are definitely, there's a gap. There's a little bit of a gap. But to think that that's how much time they're spending in front of a screen, and our solutions are still, when we look at technology as a solution, the real solution is we need to connect with people, right? We need to get out. We need to move. We need to exercise. And COVID has just amplified that 100-fold. I'm wondering, Aaron, have you seen or do you have data on the shift pre-COVID to COVID and how that's affected people's, suicide levels?
Yeah, I don't have any data to reference, just the research I've done. Obviously, there's way more cases of anxiety, depression. The isolation is just obviously wreaked a lot of havoc, and people have stayed inside way more, right? So all across all ages, right? And so you're talking about the working class, the the adolescents that are figuring out how to survive a social scene behind masks, and the whole world has been turned upside down in terms of our mental health. So it just comes back to being that much more critical to what you've said. How do we create experiences? But more importantly, for people that are willing to create socially connecting experiences and generally are more extroverted, if they don't have the opportunity, introverts aren't going to do it, And so introverts are often the ones being taken care of because somebody else is reaching out and saying hello first, right? And if that opportunity never comes, then both of them are suffering, right? The extrovert doesn't get their, I need to get out, I need to say hello, and the introvert doesn't get someone to notice them and actually appreciate them as, as the unique individual that they are, right? So we need each other, but we're going to have to figure out different ways to incentivize and motivate each other to go out and make it happen. There's a couple of things that I've been doing with work and outside of work is just scheduling Zoom calls or scheduling a Google Meet or with friends, with strangers, and just having a 15 or 30-minute conversation. And honestly, every time I go and have that conversation with somebody else, I feel lighter, I feel lifted, I feel connected, and my mental health improves, right? And all it took was, hey, you want to chat for a few minutes? Let's just book a call, But that's not something we as professionals think to do. It's not something we would think, hey, maybe my teammate could use a quick 15-minute call. But if we were to do it, it would sure make a lot of difference.
Wow. I know the idea of getting on a Zoom call has a little bit of a distaste in my mouth for connecting. But if that's the only avenue that we have is to get on and see somebody face to face and talk to somebody that we care about or that we know cares about us, then it makes a huge difference. It's not the same as meeting face to face, but it certainly is an in-between while we can't meet in groups and while we can't get out there and while we can't be as active as we'd really like to be. So I love that approach. And also I hear you say something about, I hear sort of this responsibility. For me, as having people that I work with, I might have a little bit of a responsibility to pay attention to people's moods, to pay attention to some of the things they're saying or how they're doing and check in with them. And that might be a new thought to people out there in the workforce right now.
Yeah, I don't think everyone starts with that level of selfless concern, right? I think I have an advantage where I've already lost my brother, and my heart literally just gets crushed every time I hear somebody else's story. There was one this weekend, someone losing their aunt to suicide, and it just makes you so aware that everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own struggle. And if you're not going to be the one that reaches out with any sort of caring or empathy or, mercy while they're angry or frustrated or short or snappy, if you're not patient with that and can still build a relationship through that, then who will? And ultimately I feel like anyone that has any level of concern, we do have a level of responsibility and duty to help people feel that connection and feel like they have a safe place in us. That's what We Are Mind, I think, is doing a really good job. And Nick Staggy and that group they're just pushing forward this community and this culture of it's okay to be not okay, and it's okay to share your story. We're going to actually rally around you, and we're going to lift you up, and we're going to strengthen each other. And that's something to celebrate, and that's something for sure that we need more of.
Oh, so much more of, because I think the stigma and the negative stigma around, being depressed or having those depressive symptoms or feeling suicidal or having suicidal thoughts, it has such a negative stigma, and it really keeps people in shame and not reaching out. So organizations that really address that very first piece of it's okay to talk about this, it's okay to feel that way. Plenty of other people feel that way. Let's get together and support each other. I love that idea. I think that's super powerful.
Yeah, and there's some cool apps right now that are coming out, that help create events that are kind of spontaneous and whatnot. But I think as far as some of the technologies that are coming out are really cool. One of the articles that recently came out with a prescriptive analytics mechanism. Basically, they were saying there's so many layers to your mental health. There's so many different diagnoses that you could get, but we usually kind of lump those together and then give them this lump sum response, right? So really, the people over at Spring Health is the benefits company that are taking this effort to go create a machine learning algorithm that takes in a questionnaire, or it takes a blood test, or it gives you multiple inbound diagnoses, right? And then out of 200 different diagnoses that you could potentially have, what's your makeup, right? What are the significant difficulties you're facing? And then we're going to pair that up with 200 treatments, right? And we're going to make sure that the right treatment to the right issue is being taken care of, right? And that goes back to feeling connected and feeling like the person you're expressing your vulnerabilities to is not only compassionate and empathetic, but is also relevant in what they have to say in return.
Well, that is such an important concept. And although we talk about it in recovery and in treatment all the time, right? We talk about it all the time, but the reality of matching a recovery program with an individual and making it unique to that individual is a whole lot more challenging on the face-to-face, one-on-one, when you're in a program with other people, than maybe what we really say that it is, right? Was we want to make these unique programs. We want it to be specific to them. And I think a lot of them are, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of programs have very specific treatment goals to each person. I think where we lack is the documentation is not supporting it, right? What they put down on paper does not send the message that this is a unique program for this person in this situation. And your example of a firefighter versus, a young girl overcoming trauma, there's a wide variety of people and experiences out there. And I think you're absolutely right. We have to address those specific needs and the goals, right? Someone's goal might just be, I want to be able to sit at home all day long and play games without feeling anxious. And that might be their goal, and we can't put our expectations on top of them. And somebody else's goal might be, to be the governor of a state, or, something that we might consider as fairly, run a company or something fairly, that takes a lot of more energy. And being very specific as to what is your goal, what do you want, and fit those to it. I'm curious, there's a lot of people out there, and I suspect a lot of our listeners, Aaron, you've got their attention. Where would they go to? I know you talked about We Are Mind, does a really good job talking about it. What are other resources if they want to get a hold of you, or if they want to get a hold of other resources that can help them or a loved one? What would you recommend?
Candidly, I haven't done as good a job as I would have liked to this whole time of pulling those resources and creating that as a good landing page, right? But ultimately, I think there are some really good resources with the AFSP.org, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, the Trevor Project. Ultimately, the VA, right? There's a number of veteran-based nonprofits. I don't think there's one good resource other than Google to figure out your audience and your need. Suicide Sucks mission really is pushing this potential capability that we have if we just connect the dots the right way. And I haven't ever focused on being the resource, but I focused on really spreading the message that technology with empathetic and compassionate communication will have the power to prevent suicide if we as organizations go about it the right way. So I'm happy to chat with anybody too directly. And maybe we could post an email or something after this, but Aaron@suicidesucks.com is the easiest way to reach out to me.
I love that. And I think it would be, important also to mention that there is a talk line for people who want more information, whether you're having, suicidal thoughts, or if you're a family member concerned about somebody. I think it's important to mention this line, that they have people that will answer your phone calls and answer your questions and help bring you to resources too. And that number is 800-273-8255. And that's a number that I try and keep handy at all times when someone's really suffering and struggling. And I'll even get on the phone with somebody sometimes and just say, let's just talk to somebody. Let's just talk to somebody that can maybe, give us some thoughts or some direction that's going to help improve this situation. And so anyway, I think that's a fantastic number to know as well. And
yeah, I think with that, I hear from a lot of moms and a lot of parents, a lot of dads that are dealing with a manic depressant or bipolar, or they're dealing with a child or someone that they love, frankly, that is going through a mental health crisis, right? And they're asking me, what do I do, right? And my best response to that is, if I could turn back time, I would have moved more mountains. I would have done more. And my only message to parents is, don't be on my side of the fence looking back with regret. Do everything you can, right? Take it serious. If someone is mentioning, I'd be better off dead, or I'd prefer not to be here anymore, or if they're giving any signs or indications that suicide is a potential, have the conversation. Don't be afraid to ask, are you suicidal? Are you thinking about suicide? Do you have a way to kill yourself? Do you have a plan? When are you thinking about doing that? Get into the details, because if they're thinking about it and they've actually planned it, you could be within 24 hours of losing your son or daughter. And you don't want to be on this side of the fence looking back thinking, I should have, I could have, and the worst one, I would have, right? If you would have, then do it now.
That's powerful advice, Aaron. And having experienced or having close people that have died myself or have taken their own lives, I often will say, I don't care how much the hospital costs. Take them there now. Take them there right now, because saving their life is far more important than the cost of what it might take to get them the help that they need. Do whatever you have to get them help, because this is preventable, but you do have to take action. So super wise instruction. And just get help. You can't overdo it, right? Because the hospitals will assess. The hospitals will, and not that they're always right, but they have resources. There are resources out there, and you have to do something, as opposed to, and recognize the signs. So the awareness is huge, is to recognize there are things that people say that give you clues they're not doing well, and they are thinking about it. And so learning to recognize those things is important.
Yeah, and most counties have a list of trainings that you can get, right? Like a QPR training would be incredible. If you're going to get deeper and get like an assist training, which actually goes to practicing responses and how do you communicate with someone that is actively suicidal, and how do you de-escalate a situation like that safely and help you feel more comfortable in those circumstances. So if you're like me, that preparation really helps you feel a lot more confident going into those circumstances. And especially if you're dealing with someone that you love in those active circumstances, any training or any insight that you can gain into both what we've learned as a community, as society, of what they're going through scientifically, medically, but also emotionally, and how do you empathize with that, what they're going through, so that you can communicate the right way. And that's what it always comes back down to, right? How do we communicate our love and our insistency that their life is worth more alive than if they were to die, right? And that's the thing that's most misaligned in their thought process is, I'm better off dead. My family will be better without me, right? And that's where their brain is misfiring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely misfiring. And I love that you bring up the idea that talking to them about their plans and their thoughts of suicide is not going to cause them to commit or take their own life. It's not. We are afraid of that. A lot of people are afraid of that. I know before I had education around, suicide prevention and understanding it better, I would go, I can't talk about this because then they'll go and act on it. And that is a myth. That's not true. So I love that you bring that up. Thank you for bringing that up. And Aaron, thank you for being so passionate about something that is life-changing and that really does make a difference and that affects I think it affects everybody. I don't know if too many people have not been touched by, someone taking their own life at some point in time, particularly people close to them. So I sure appreciate what you're doing and the efforts you're making. I love to hear you say, I quit my job so that I could figure out how to do this better. And the jobs that you're taking are absolutely focused on learning how to make a difference in this field that you're passionate about. So I love that. It's huge. And I honor you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. And ultimately, it's just one of those things that I can't let go of. So if anyone's going to be joining this crusade with me, more the merrier, because, our reach has to get to that next person to prevent it, right? It's one person at a time, and only one of me can only reach so far. So the more of us, the better.
What's your ideal, Suicide Sucks future?
So ideally, I actually have pretty strong vision in terms of how do I take those data inputs and understand, basically do some descriptive and predictive analytics based off of if I could get current death records and actually figure out what are some of those inputs that have led to suicide in 100% confirmation, right? And then actually teach an algorithm correctly how to identify suicide. My ideal future would be to go start up a technology firm that then enables organizations and employers to then have some insight and indication, maybe not into individual cases or, knowing someone's personal identity and their struggles, but to have more insight into the total mental health of their organization, right? As a business leader, I would 100% want to know if 30% of my organization is severe depression to suicidal, right? If there's any way to get, both insurance companies involved and employers involved and get more power to the parents and family members of those that are struggling through technology. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I would love to go down that path and start a technology company that creates a tool that's both protective of privacy and individual rights and empathetic to people that are struggling and empathetic to people that don't want other people to know that they're struggling, but still be able to provide some level of additional support and even escalated support when those emergency crises were coming up.
Yeah, the technology you talked about at the crisis level is fascinating. The power of change that could potentially have. On the same wavelength, if you can keep people from getting to crisis level, that would be a bigger win. How do we just enable all people to have the either emotional or mental tools to help know that they're a little off, right? How do you create and maintain connection before you get to the point where you're at crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously,
That's amazing.
That's the question, right? How do we get proactive about this? How do we not have crisis? And I think that comes back down to how do we support and build up families where parents are involved and are supporting their kids and where siblings are enabled and empowered to ask questions of their siblings that, that would dig into their deepest parts of them and actually pull it out and say, my brother mentioned to me in his emails, I got stuck and I've done things that I feel are unforgivable. And I wish I could reach through the screen through time and strangle him then, right? Like nothing is unsurpassable. Nothing is insurmountable when you have family and you have a support system, right? I mean, and if that family support system isn't internal, but it's external, so a friend, a coworker, a boss, doesn't really matter, but we have to have someone in our corner when we go through a trial or experience that we can't get through, that we can rely on and expect that our reputation and our future still has hope. And I think that's the hard part. Suicide is a result, and like you mentioned before, it's a symptom of hopelessness. And whatever that is that breaks people's hope of a brighter future than today, their hope of a less painful tomorrow than they have today, whenever that hope is fully broken, that's when we lose people. And so it really comes a matter of how do we get proactive? Well, what are the things that build hope in a brighter tomorrow than we have today? And like we've mentioned, that honestly comes back to our connection, our relationships, but also our education, both into our own health and our mental stability, as well as resources, tools, activities to do. We just need to get more invested in taking care of each other.
Well, you're on an amazing path. Thanks for taking time for us today. Hopefully, some of these conversations can spark positivity for individuals, right? Maybe some empathy from family members. I think you're probably not that far away from getting the kind of support that you need for the program, right? To where, you can really take these skills and this passion and dive into it full time. And I'm optimistic about the journey, right? I'm sorry to hear about your loss. It's tragic. And at this point, all it can do is become a message of hope for other people, right? Like you're saying, like, let's take that and who your brother was and make changes in people's lives who still have hope. Because like you said, there's always forgiveness, right? There's nothing that's unforgivable. There's always a life after, or whatever an individual might think is insurmountable at this point. There's always something, right? There's always a future. So
yeah,
kudos to you and everything that you're doing.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for letting me on today. I'm pretty embarrassed at the quality of the website and the resources. I wish I have done a better job of that. But I at one point I put 10, 15 videos of people's stories and just scroll through them on the website, but it would take 10 seconds to load. And people bounced off so fast. I was getting 2 or 3 visits a day, and I thought this is not going to work. So I took them all off. And anyway, I haven't had that resource to just get a good website with quality, and so the less attention to that, the better.
Is that time, on your behalf in getting those things right, or is it money? What's the resource that's short?
Mostly time, and if I were to pay for it to be done, what started this whole conversation, the audiences, that's really been a hard thing for me, because I built Suicide Sucks with the brand and the imagery to go after teenage rockers like my brother was, and he would resonate with this edgy looking brand that stuck out, right? And there's a lot of guys that wear the shirt because they love the design, right? And it fits that audience. But everything that I'm doing, preventing technology, this whole roadmap of what stages need to be accomplished in order for us all to be more successfully preventing, it's not really that brand. So I've needed to split the brand and create a new version of, this is my prevention stuff, and this is we're gonna build a community around rockers.
Yeah, you kind of need the professional level, that's the holding tank, right? And then kind of audience intuitive brands like you're talking about, right?
Yeah. I ended up buying eliminatesuicide.org at one point, and I thought about doing a whole site for that, but so it's just been time and money. It's been both at this point.
Yeah. Well, my hope would be that somebody hears it and they think, this doesn't sound expensive. I think some of those things can be bridged pretty easily by, a donor, where it's when you're trying to pay your bills with your regular job and do this on the side, it's, a lot more challenging, because that's, we own a bunch of different websites that don't generate income, and those fees add up, right? The registry fees and the monthly fees and hosting and all that kind of stuff, it just adds up over time. So to me it feels like a little could go a long way, in helping you with that. And so, hopefully we can help create some content to get that out there. So
yeah, that'd be great. Ultimately, those donations definitely help, empower. I love going into someone's story and investing a good amount of money and quality into the video content, because when you do a good video and it goes and it visits 100,000 people, my stepdad's firefighter story hit 100,000 firefighters in 7 days, right? And I just was appalled at the comments. Thank you for sharing this, Captain Stevens. This is so helpful. And the wives, thank you for sharing this. I'm showing this to my husband. There's just so much there with that audience that, just convinced me this is what we have to do. We have to micro group it, niche it down, and we have to get good quality stories for each person that's struggling. So it would be really cool just to create this whole like a TikTok for that,
While you were just talking about that, it made me think of like, the Funny or Die website, where you've got these professionals who are creating content, but the real intent of the site is we want like everybody just putting their content on here, right? Like amateurs are putting skits on there, improv studios are putting their stuff on there. I wonder if it'd be interesting to explore creating a site like that where you're saying, okay, let's create some of these stories, right? Let's create some of these motivational stories on our own platform. But the intent of the platform is to say, put your own story on here, right? Like everybody deals with a different issue. What's your issue? What do you use to overcome it, right? And we all know people who have overcome it love to share that story, right? If you found a tool that works for you, people are often not very shy about that. And especially if you were able to put on tools like kind of VidAngel has, where you were able to say, hey, it's a place to host, it's a place to connect, it's a place to talk about your stories and that kind of thing. But there's also some really cool tools on here where like, hey, if you get on, we actually have an editor where you can upload, a quick little video of yourself, and we'll, the tools to edit it like a Canva or those types of tools that I think are getting a lot cheaper and easier to get to. That could be a pretty cool community.
Yeah, it'd be sweet. At that point, to build all that is pretty just capital intensive up front, right? So I've kind of gone down that journey, and ultimately when you start saying, submit your own content, like a user generated platform, now you're talking about so much, right? You're talking about spam. First of all, I put one time like a submit your video or your content, and my inbox filled with like hundreds of emails every day from people just submitting like lines of code, just spamming me. And I was like, what is this? Like, you can't trust anything out there because so much of the internet is just automated bots filtering websites and hitting websites. And anyway, so that's annoying, but you can build around that. And then the other part is there's some liability there, right? And there's some actual level of both privacy as well as like when you're talking about asking for someone's story, there's some risk of saying, I'm the company promoting someone's gruesome graphic. You have to have some quality built into that to make sure that it stays positive, first of all, and then also safe,
Yeah.
It's pretty intensive. But
it's pretty intensive. And I think when you're looking at that as like, okay, Aaron in his living room trying to figure out this, how do I eat the elephant? It's too overwhelming. It's too overwhelming, right? But I think your story and your ability could be pretty valuable to the right group, right? Because I think there are those groups where you say, you take a pretty decent sized software company, you take a social media company or somebody and say, if you could make that connection and have them say, okay, here's a guy who's passionate about this. We have all of the tools for this already, right? We just really need to deploy it, and it wouldn't take that much, right?
Yeah.
To me, I think it feels like there's a tipping point a little bit there. And so that's the part that I think to me is interesting of like, okay, I don't know that, what you're doing now ever turns into this behemoth, but it's really easy for me to see somebody seeing what you're doing and being like, okay, this is the guy we've been looking for, right? This is, we want to do good. This is an area where we want to spend our money and use our technology, and we need the right body to kind of spend the time running that ship. To me, that feels like a tipping point.
I've been looking for that group for a few years, so if you let me know.
Well, it's exposure, right? It's just exposure.
Yeah, it's the network, right? Yeah.
And there's how many unicorns in Utah right now, right? I mean, what you're talking about is a drop in the bucket for the right group.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's I think for as much as you put into something like this, you take a lot of hits, because everyone's story is personal. It's personal to them, but then it becomes personal for me, and it's hard. It's hard to maintain the energy and the fuel to go be the sales guy and and network, and do all that when I have so much focus on the problem and the solution. It's hard for me to do all those things, and I've just been like, how do I? Anyway, maybe this is going to be one of those catalysts, jumping points where we can make some introductions, but ultimately it's one of those things that will not ever leave my agenda, right? It's going to be on my life's mission forever. It's just a matter of how long it takes to find the right group and the right, pieces to put together to apply all this energy to. So anyway, I appreciate it.
You need a benefactor.
Yep. I think so. And there's a lot of grant money out there for this particular thing, and you could join with someone like UVU they have money put aside just for suicide prevention, and there's other organizations that do that as well. And if you could, collaborate, even with Google, right? Google's huge, but you've got a vision. Maybe they're the right benefactors for you. I don't know, but there's lots out there. So I'll keep thinking about that.
Again, involves the schools is a smart idea. It's a good idea. Okay, well, keep us posted. We'll keep our eye on you. Let us know if you need anything.
Will do.
Okay, thanks, man.
Well,
Thanks, Aaron.